And that's a good sign. We ask that you will continue to keep all of the sick of our church in our prayers as we go through the week. It is in the book of Nehemiah that we want to speak from this morning. Nehemiah, the first chapter, and also the second chapter, 1 through 8 of that second chapter. Beginning at chapter 1, verses 1 through chapter 2 to verses 8. If you have it, say amen. Amen. Would you stand with us, please, as I read it into your hearing? Beginning at verse 1, it reads like this. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hagaliah, and it came to pass in the month of Chislew, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Let's go down to the second chapter, verse 1 and 2. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, and in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very so afraid. You may be seated. This first chapter of Nehemiah centers around his praying to God for a breakthrough. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Praying for a breakthrough. Praying for a breakthrough. Has there ever been a time in your life when you felt like you were in the wrong place? Maybe you came in this morning looking for your area or your seat that you usually sit in. And it was already occupied.
All right.
And you had to find somewhere else to sit. And maybe in sitting there now, as you look around in this new place, a new spot, you may be squirming because it is not where you usually sit. For there are times when we feel like we are in the wrong place. Well, let me introduce you to Nehemiah, a guy who, by no stretch of the imagination, was not an ordinary guy. We're talking about a guy who was a leader par excellence. A leader par excellence. But for the moment, he is a cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. Can you imagine being qualified to be the President of the United States? And here you are, a cupbearer. You seem out of place. This is not what I bargained for. This is not what I went to school for. This is not what I prepared myself for.
Yes.
And yet here I am. I'm sure it may not be that you are qualified to be the President of the United States, but think of your qualities in terms of what you are qualified to be, as over against where you are. They may not balance out. And in their failure to balance out, you may be thinking that you're in the wrong place. It's easy to get the notion you're in the wrong place when you're not where you want to be. Amen, lights. Oh, I know you hear me because you're quiet.
All right.
Amen. I know you're listening because you're quiet. And I know you're listening because a lot of us in here feel like we're out of place. We're in things. We're at places. We're at points in our lives. And many times we just feel out of place where we are. Well, I know that, so I thought I would talk to you this morning about a man whose name is Nehemiah, who felt the same way that you now feel. So I thought I would introduce him to you. Now, Nehemiah was a guy who, by no stretch of the imagination, was not an ordinary guy. We're talking about a guy who was a leader par excellence. But for the moment, he is a cupbearer. With all of those skills, he is a cupbearer for a king. A cupbearer was one who sampled the king's drink. In other words, when it came time to feed the king and they would bring him water or wine, it was Nehemiah's job to sample the wine. Amen. Why? Because, first of all, you see, if you wanted to have a rebellion, if you wanted to overthrow the king, then one of the things that you would do is put poison in the wine. And they would pick somebody that was close to the king, who was on their side, that would do that. And the king knew that. So what the kings would do would always select their favor in order to be the cupbearer.